So I've got on here, and I'm going to share my screen as well so you can see it. That would help, wouldn't it? So I think overall it's a really good first draft. Like, it looks good. It's got all the right bits in all the right places for sure. And sorry. And it definitely flows so that there is an argument that's going through it. There's certainly a narrative that's going through it. So I think you've got all the kind of the bases in the right place. However, I do think that there are a couple of things that you need to address, and the major one being being the fact that for a world studies essay, it has to have that equal focus on your two disciplines, the biology and the philosophy. And at the moment, the biology comes through really strongly, but the philosophy not so much until the end. So I think you need to kind of weave some of the philosophy arguments in much earlier into the essay. All right. So if we start at the beginning, I also think as well, because this world studies essay, it's basically taking a global issue and then looking at it in a local context. So I think you need to set the global issue a little bit more clearly. So at the beginning, you have got global statistics and things, which is great. So I think there's an element there. But when I thought about it, I think Millennium Development Goals to kind of as an overarching starting point, because the Millennium Development Goals that were originally there were started in 2000 that have now been replaced by the Sustainable Development Goals. So do you know what I'm talking about when I'm using this? Yeah. So the original Millennium Development Goals, number 5 was specifically about maternal health. So I've put a link on the feedback sheet for you. Now, a lot of that really was to do with kind of less developed countries, certainly. So I don't think you need to kind of go into masses about it. But I think the very fact that the UN was recognizing that maternal health globally was an issue in 2000 and was a real target for them to hit by 2015 gives this essay some real context, particularly and then you go on to argue and say, and actually for most of the developed world, numbers have been falling the whole time, but the US it's going the other way, and that's a real concern. And I think framing it in terms of those Millennium Development Goals will show that actually this is a global concern issue. Does that make sense? And then the Millennium Development Goals are obviously a bit out of date because they finished in 2015. That maternal health part has now come into Sustainable Goal 3, and again I've put the link on there. And so without sort of being dragged down a wormhole of the Sustainable Development Goals, it's just about putting in a little paragraph that says this is a really big issue globally. Perhaps it's the kind of thing that people focus on in the less developed world because that's where we hear all the terrible statistics from. But actually, this essay is going to show you that we should be concerned about this from a slightly different perspective in the more developed world as well. And then you're using the US and the Netherlands to compare and contrast. Okay? Tell me if any of this doesn't make sense, because I can't see you, so I'm kind of just working off if it. Then I think you need to be much clearer about why the research question needs an interdisciplinary approach. So somewhere in your introduction, you definitely now have stated you're going to look at this from a biological and a philosophical perspective. So for biology, I'll look at it this way, and for philosophy, I'll look at it this way. But I think here you need to say why it's so important to consider it from both aspects. And really, it's that argument, isn't it, that birth isn't just about the science, nor can it be in the developed world just about the kind of the philosophy and the culture. There has to be a blend of the two, and there has to be a balance between the two. So I think it's that kind of idea that you're sort of drawing out a little bit. Sorry if hear my little girl screaming in the background. You can. And then I think the other big thing that we need to do is put in some primary data. And I know we talked about this before, because at the moment you've got a lot of secondary information. You've got stuff you've read in texts and journals, which is really good, and you've got data that you've picked up from some of these different places, but you've not got any primary research of your own, and I think that's going to flag a little bit. So do you remember we talked about whether you could interview some midwives or some mothers? I think you said you knew some midwives, did you? And I mean, the only problem is they might not have worked in either of these countries in particular. Um, but sort of interview them from the perspective and ask them their point of view, perhaps on the two arguments or something, and see if they've got an opinion, perhaps. I don't know, like a specialist opinion on what they think works. And then I think we should. Do you remember I said to you, I've got the friend that has had the baby in the Netherlands. She was happy to talk to you. So I could put you in touch with her, and you could either speak to her or put some questions down that she could reply to. So you've got a view on, what her experience is like, how she found it in the Netherlands, and then we need to maybe try and find someone that's done the same thing in the US and just see if there's a difference between them. Otherwise, I think you're relying too much on secondary data, and it becomes a little bit of a about what's in all the texts rather than an actual piece of research. I would, if I were you, have a think about what questions you would want to ask a midwife and what questions you would want to ask these two mothers, and put them down for me and send them to me, and then I can try and have a look with you and refine them a little bit, and then we can work out who we're going to get them to. Perfect. And then we've got time to build it in. And actually, I mean, it's not gonna be huge amounts of analysis maybe, but it might just be then things that they say that you can use to back up other arguments that are coming through in your essay. But you'll be able to say, and when I interviewed a practicing midwife, this, she felt la 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 la. And when I interviewed the mother in the Netherlands, this was exactly what her experience had been, that kind of thing. It just gives it a bit more punch. Okay. So that's probably I'd say those are the two biggest things or the three biggest things is set the global context a bit more with the kind of Millennium Sustainable Goal, the combination of get the philosophy coming through more strongly from the beginning, and these primary data interviews so you've got more substance to what goes in the essay. All right. And then really a lot of this is then related, because in terms of your knowledge and understanding, the biology stuff comes through really strong. You've got some great information, and you've kind of extracted really useful pieces. Sometimes it's more of a narrative, and by that sometimes it's a bit like, well, this is what I've read in a book, so you tell me what the book says, and you don't actually then relate it back to your research question. You just kind of move on to the next point. Whereas what you need to be doing is, if you're talking about, what a book has said, you need to all be going back and relating it to that idea. Sorry, I'm just finding it here. To what extent do those birth norms affect the country's maternal mortality rate, for example? So every time you kind of try and make a point in the essay, you should be kind of linking back. The last thing in the paragraph should be, this suggests that this really does influence the maternal mortality rate, or this factor does not seem to have a significant impact on the maternal mortality rate. Something like that. So you're always just linking it back in. Yeah. It's more a stylistic thing, really, and then you're kind of analysing the information a bit more. So, like I said there, rather than applying the knowledge and saying this answers my research question, because I don't mean you necessarily have to phrase it exactly like that. You can phrase it tidier, but that's the point I was trying to make. You've got to keep answering that research question all the way through. And the links to philosophy all the way through as well. And what I felt was towards the end of the essay, you made some really good points. It's almost right at the end about the philosophical side to all of this. Yeah, in your conclusion, you're talking about all the sort of the ethics and everything. And I was like, oh, there's really good points here, but it's almost the first time I've heard them. And that's in almost the last paragraph of the essay. So I need you to take these arguments that are here and see where they would slot in already, because they'll slot in with some of the other points you're already making. But I think you've been so focused on writing about the biology side of it that the philosophy's sort of just been pushed away at the end. Yeah, I think so. I think that would be a really good starting point. Like if you're saying, the theory of utilitarianism promotes what will make the most people happy, and then negative is almost that will promote the least amount of harm. See if there's somewhere else in your essay where you think actually that's essentially what I was trying to say, and kind of put that argument in there. Is that okay? Sorry? Oh no, have I lost you? Sorry, are you still there? Sorry. Just hang on, baby doll. Sorry, are you still there? Okay. And then, yeah, I think like overall your presentation is really good. Your layout is good. Your bibliography and all your referencing is good as well. I just wondered sometimes whether some of those tables would work better as graphs. Because there's a lot of tabulated information, and it would just be nice if at least a couple of them you turned into like a bar chart or something, just to show that you've processed the data a little bit. So something like this one would be an easy one to turn into a graph. It's based on data that you're plotting, or two graphs, whichever way you want to do it, but I think it would be a good one. Okay. And then the RPPF, the reflection, the engagement all comes through that RPPF form. So maybe we'll book in another meeting sort of maybe towards the end of September, and I can have a look at your RPPF then, because you might have done a bit more on the essay then and might be able to write a little bit more about the reflection process. And we might things like, done some of those interviews and that kind of thing, so we can just look at that slightly separately. So I think the main thing, I'm just looking, like I've said, 3, 7, plus whatever this would be. So it's already up there as a kind of, I would say anyway, as a 19 or 20. So it's, to me, it's well within the pass, which is great. I'd just say it's getting those bits we talked about at the beginning, the context right, and the more of the philosophy coming through to make it a real world studies piece. Because that's when I look back at all the criteria, that's what it constantly comes back to, is how does it fit with those two disciplines? How does it fit with those two disciplines? Okay. So I'm just gonna think the recording's about to end. It gives me 15 minutes.